Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. Today I wanted to talk about a question that I get a lot on stream. So I've run just about every single Pokemon game, and before we've done a video on what the most difficult Pokemon games are. Now I wanted to talk to you guys about what the easiest ones are, as in which Pokemon games are the easiest to get into for speedrunning. For today's video, I'm going to be going over 6 different Pokemon games, in no particular order, 3 main games and 3 side games. I'm going to talk about what makes them easy, about how you can pick them up, and I'll make sure to link guides in the description below in case you want to try it out yourself. Pokemon speedrunning overall is really not that hard to get into, and most games are really achievable if you want to get started into Pokemon speedrunning. Today, I just want to point out a few that are particularly easy by comparison, talk to you about why they're easy, how you should go about approaching these, and, just give you guys a little bit of an idea of what you could consider starting with if you are interested in trying out Pokemon speedrunning. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. So for the first game on our list, we're going to dive right into the main series, and I'm going to start with Pokemon Sword and Shield. Now, I should note right away, Pokemon Sword and Shield any percent is actually quite a difficult category. Today, I wanted to talk about specifically Pokemon Sword and Shield any percent with DLC. So the way that the run works is you start the game and you play through the first, give or take 45 minutes normally. Nothing too difficult there. Then, once you get Fly, you're gonna go to basically like the second town again, and you're gonna jump on the train to the Crown Tundra DLC. In there, you can do the Dynamax adventure, and the idea is you catch a Pokemon right at the start, if possible, one of the first ones you'll find if they're good enough, and you run with that for the duration of the game. There's a huge list out there of which Pokemon work, which Pokemons don't. The pros of this is that the moment that you catch that Pokemon, if it's a random Pokemon, it's going to be level 65, and if it's the legendary, it's going to be level 70. We still take the random Pokemon because usually they're strong enough and they'll do for most of the run, because you're going to be so over-leveled that throughout basically the first 60 to 70% of the game, you just one-shot everything. Some Pokemon are better than others, and some Pokemon have more detailed routes than others. But generally speaking, you'll usually be able to find at least something early on that you can get, and it's a really easy way to get into running this game. This means that because you're so overleveled, you really don't have to worry about a whole lot of things, and you can just rush through the game. And a lot of the game really is just mashing as fast as possible. But it's also a good way to learn how to approach a run like this, little things that come into it, and it's a good, stepping stone to bigger runs. So yeah, that's why Pokemon Sword and Shield any percent with DLC would be a pretty good beginner run. Next up on our list, we have Detective Pikachu. Now this is a bit of an oddball choice here, but Detective Pikachu is easily one of the easiest Pokemon games to get into, albeit not necessarily one of the most interesting ones to get into. Detective Pikachu is the game which the movie was based off of, and in many ways, it just attempts to kind of just play through the game fast. It doesn't really have a whole lot of going for it other than just go through the motions as quick as you can. And there are guides out there for just about every chapter in this game, so you can kind of just take the guide, go through all the chapters, do the necessary steps, and just, watch the cutscenes, because there's a lot of cutscenes in this game. This is one of those games where it's a bit of a weird choice, and it's also a bit of a long game, but it is definitely a very easy game to get into. I will say the run is about 5.5 hours, so it does take a significant chunk of time to actually complete a run. Although, actually running it itself is fairly straightforward. It's recommended to at least have played through the game at some point, but really if you've played it once, speedrunning this is not a difficult task. There are some moments where there's some precision timing, but even that's very lenient, and really you shouldn't have much trouble picking this up if you'd like to get into it. So yeah, Detective Pikachu. Like I said, bit of an oddball pick, but definitely not a hard game to get into. Next up on our list, let's go back to some main series. Another fantastic choice, and honestly one of my earliest games to get into when I started Pokemon speedrunning myself, is Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal. I chose Crystal for this list specifically, but really you can replace it with either Gold or Silver as well. The thing with Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal is it's one of those games with a very high skill ceiling, but it can be very easy to get into. Back when I started running myself, I actually started with Red, and Red is a bit more technical than Crystal is. Back then, RNG manipulations weren't a thing yet, so there is a very well-optimized route using no RNG manipulations at all. And actually getting started with Pokemon Crystal that way is really not all that difficult. The Manipulus route is only a few minutes slower than the optimal with RNG manip routes. So even if you just get into it and just do the Manipulus route, it'll still be a fantastic way to kind of get used to the game, to kind of get a feeling for how Pokemon speedrunning works as a whole, and it makes it just a very low barrier entry point. This goes for a lot of Pokemon games, but Crystal definitely stands out to me because it's one of the games with the earliest reset points, because if you have to reset for your starter stats, the reset point is only about 2 minutes in. It stands out because the route for it for Manipulus is more optimized than that of most games, and there really are only a few points in the run where things can really go wrong. If you do get into it, I do recommend, especially early on, to save before Bugsy, the second rival fight, Whitney, maybe Chuck, and Red. Those are like the 5 fights that can screw you over. The nice thing about Crystal, though, is that once you get past Chuck, there's pretty much nothing that can really screw you over until you get all the way to Red. And at that point, even if you do lose, you've kind of already had a practice run of the entire game. So nothing really that can go too horribly wrong there. So yeah, Pokemon Crystal is probably one of the easier main series to get into. If you're interested in something that's a little bit more challenging, that definitely has a little bit more like spice to it in a way, while still being relatively easy, relatively low barrier, and just an overall good time. Okay, let's get into probably the easiest game on this list. So, let's get into Pokemon Stadium. Whenever somebody asks me what is the easiest Pokemon speedrun to do, this is the one to come to mind to me. Stadium is both the easiest and probably one of the most brutal games you'll ever have to do. See, the thing with Stadium is it's a very easy game to get into. It's really not all that difficult, but it is very, very reliant on RNG. See, the problem with Stadium is it's nothing but RNG. The patterns are pretty much all scripted. Essentially, you only have to do like what is it, 5 inputs every minute or so. So you've got plenty of time to think. But you are very, very reliant on hitting the move Thunder. And Thunder is only 70% accurate. This is actually kind of a funny thing with Stadium. So the Stadium leaderboards is huge. There's about, if you include emulator runners, about 120 or so players. And one of the top 20 times was a day 1 speedrun. The reason for that is if you get lucky enough in this run, you can pretty much go through the entire game and get a top time basically on your first run. In fact, I've run this game probably like somewhere between 5 and 10 times, and my first run is still my best time to this day. And it really is just a testament to how ridiculous this game can get. This game is absolutely not a game you'll want to grind. It's absolutely not something you'll want to do as your main game because it is mentally exhausting as heck. But it is one of those games where getting into it, at least, is super easy. Because you just pick up the notes, follow what they do, and hope you hit your thunders. And you're gonna mostly be alright if you do. So yeah, Stadium is kind of a dumb game, and I wouldn't really recommend anyone picking this game up, but if you're looking for something a little bit easier, something that doesn't take a whole lot of out of you, that, you know, is kind of there as an option for something fun in between other Pokemon games or even other games in general, Stadium could definitely be a fun one to try out. So yeah, that's why we put Stadium on here. Next up on our list, we have the last side game that I'm going to be talking about here, and that's Pokmon Park. So Pokmon Park is probably the most fun of the 3 side games that I've mentioned. And this is really true for both Pokmon Park 1 and Pokmon Park 2. Both of these are very easy to get into. In Pokmon Park, I mean, you may have seen some of my runs of this recently, but the idea is in Pokmon Park that you have to go through the game and make enough friends. In order to actually get to the end, you need to make 80 friends before you reach Salamence. Now, which friends to make, that's all routed out. Most of these friends you just make through small little mini games, like playing tag or a small battle, and this is really easy to get into. The fun thing with Pokmon Park is that this run in and of itself, like, it's very lenient. You really don't have to be a pro in Pokmon Park to get enough points on the attractions, and even if you don't get enough points the first time around, it's generally fairly easy to just do the mini game again and get enough points the second time. Pokmon Park is just one of those fairly it's one of the more involved runs, especially when it comes to the side games on this list, while at the same time being a pretty easygoing game that's not hard to get into. You don't really need a lot of knowledge going into this run. Just like with most other games, it's good to have played it before, but if you kind of know where to go and what the game is about, it's really not that hard to play through this. There are definitely some challenging parts, especially the lava zone has a few challenging attractions, and there are some other points where things do get a little bit difficult, but it's never really all that hard. Pokmon Park is one of those games that's really been targeted a little bit more to a younger audience, and the speedrun kind of shows that in a way, at least in its difficulty. So while it's very fast-paced, and while there is a lot to it in like small movement things, optimizing how you do your attractions, making sure you get through it all as well as you can, it's also not a very difficult game, especially to get into. So yeah, if you're looking for a side game to get into, I can strongly recommend the Pokmon Park games. And this really goes for both Pokmon Park 1 and Pokmon Park 2. Neither of them are very difficult, neither of them are very hard to get into, and they're both just a lot of fun to play through. They're really a really good beginner speedrun if you're interested in Pokemon side games. So that brings us to the last game on our list, Pokemon Omega Ruby. And I'm going to specifically talk about Omega Ruby because Omega Ruby is a bit more lenient than Alpha Sapphire is. Omega Ruby makes the list as one of the easier and more fun main series games to get into. The thing with Omega Ruby is that when you start the game, your Mudkip stats matter, but outside of that, it doesn't really, because after you get past the 5th gym, you get Latios, and then towards the end, you get Groudon. Latios is a little bit better for the speedrun than Latias, which is why I specifically point out Omega Ruby, and Groudon and Kyogre do have a difference, and Kyogre is a little bit easier, although the difference really isn't big enough to make up for it. The Pokemon Omega Ruby speedrun is one of those runs that has fairly few big decisions you need to make over the course of the run, and there aren't too many fights that can really screw you over. The most famous, or really most notorious one is Hideki, but that one's just kind of a little bit of RNG that you have to deal with, and you can just save before the fight. Omega Ruby is one of the games that, if you're interested, especially in the later generation Pokemon games, especially with the 3DS ones, it's a nice one to get into because it doesn't involve any RNG manips, while still being fairly consistent regardless of the kind of stats you have. Really the only part that actually plays a significant role is the Mudkip stats, and even if those aren't great, you can usually get away with it, albeit there are some requirements on it. It helps that Omega Ruby is one of those games that just has a lot of leniency to it. If you make a mistake, it's usually not a huge deal, and you can often just kind of play around that. So, while definitely not the easiest game, it is one of those games that is relatively easy to get into, has a lot of leniency over the course of the run, especially in the second half, where usually most runs would get a little bit more difficult. And on top of that, just being very detailed in its route, guiding you through basically everything you need to do. I think a lot of the beginner notes even have like videos or like images of, okay, this is the direction you need to go. So if you kind of know your way around the Hoenn region, it's really not that difficult. So yeah, Omega Ruby is definitely a game I could advise. If you have the possibilities of capturing 3DS, which is a little bit more difficult than with the other consoles mentioned, it is absolutely one of those games that could be worth trying your hand at. So yeah, that'll just about do it for this list. I hope it gives you an idea of which games to pick up. If you do decide to pick up one of these Pokemon games as a speedrun as a result of this video, leave it in the comments. I'm always curious to see more people pick up Pokemon speedrunning. Anyway, I'll wrap it up right there. Hope you guys had fun. Be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to head over to Twitch, where we do all sorts of these kind of runs as well. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Cheers!